Welcome to the Numbers Don't Tell Stories show. Each week, we like to give our listeners ideas on how to evaluate numbers through story. Our desire is to entertain you and provide you with useful insight. All right, well, welcome. This is the inaugural episode 1 of Numbers Don't Tell Stories. It's a brand new podcast for us. I'm Tom Etchison, that's Matthew Dix, and we're your co-hosts for this adventure. By way of background, the thing that brought us here is both have an affinity and an enjoyment of numbers and data. And we recognize that numbers are powerful by themselves, yet they don't have the full effect unless they've got some sort of framework or a story around them. And so what we're trying to do is put together a show that's designed to be useful and help people better understand how to utilize numbers within the context of a story. So we're going to take things out of the news, out of social media, throw them up here on the screen, and we're going to talk about them. We're going to try to put them into better context, better stories, as a way of appreciating that data. Little background on me. I own a couple of companies in the data space, one that does consulting, one that does the creation of data assets. And I've always loved numbers. I've underappreciated the story aspect of that. And I got the opportunity to meet and work with Matthew Dix, and he really changed my perspective on storytelling, and the impact it has in all forms of communication, but especially in the data arena. And so he's been a massive influence on my journey and storytelling and just a general love of it. As I introduce Matthew Dix, I'll let him talk about himself a little bit here, but he is just a brilliant storyteller. He's got books on storytelling, very accomplished in that arena. He's a teacher, and he's also a storytelling champion. He's got at least 10 Moth Story Slam championships to his credit. So he's an amazing resource in this whole endeavor, because he can also not just tell a great story, but he can tell us why and how to put the elements together. So, Matthew, I'm so excited to be here with you doing this first one, and take it away. Give a little introduction.
Sure. Well, you just did a great job of it, Tom, so I appreciate that. By day, I'm an elementary school teacher for the last 27 years. I've been writing novels and nonfiction for about 15 years now. Novels on a bunch of topics, and nonfiction on storytelling and personal productivity. When I'm not teaching, I am consulting and coaching large companies, small companies. Right now, I work for Google, Amazon, Alta Vista, AstraZeneca, the FBI, all of these companies and organizations who come to me looking for me to help them tell better stories about the work they do, the numbers they present, the data they gather, all of those kinds of things. So it was an unexpected career path that I found myself on, but I'm enjoying it quite a bit.
That's awesome. Well, and the podcast thing is new for both of us. I feel like it's a way to get this out into the world and help people a little bit. I'm going to share my screen here and bring up some of the visuals for the things we're going to talk about today. And I thought, as I was doing that what I think is really amazing is the ability to talk about very fascinating story about a Japanese artist named Hokusai. And he has this very storied set of prints that he painted over a period of time. And it starts here with very, as a new artist at 37, all the way up to 72. And it kind of represents this journey with the podcast for us. We have some experience in this area, but we're kind of starting off here and hoping to get to this ability to paint these much more vibrant pictures for people. Interestingly, he said by the age of 110, he wanted every dot and every line to have a life of its own. I think that's just such a fascinating thing. The backstory on things is often more more interesting than the story itself in some ways.
Yeah, I love that. I actually have that fourth image, his image from 1831. I have it in my classroom. I teach Shakespeare to my students and we perform Shakespeare. And the year we did The Tempest, we had someone commissioned to paint that, to recreate it on a large scene so that we could have it on the side of the stage to represent the island in The Tempest. So I look at that every day. It's great that you brought it up because it just feels like I'm right back at home right now.
Well, and it just represents an evolution. So, which kind of brings me to the place where we're going to start this podcast. We're going to kind of lead with the lead, so to speak. And here are some numbers about podcasting that I pulled out of some statistics that are widely available about podcasting. And I feel like if we're going to talk about numbers and we're going to do a podcast, why not lead with some numbers about podcasting and the impact that they've had? And you can kind of see from 2018 through 2024 on this graph some interesting numbers. And these numbers are not evident by this graph, but it's in the millions of episodes. And so you can kind of see during COVID, this spike. 2023 might be an anomaly, but things are kind of starting to tail off in 2024. And so people might look at these numbers and just think, okay, well, podcasting may be starting to wane, or the number of episodes may be waning. Maybe I can interpret that maybe long form podcasts are more popular. Maybe people are doing fewer episodes, but longer, those sorts of things. And I find it interesting that there's a chart like this, but there's really, you have to go digging to try to put some interesting story behind this. And so I found some interesting data, and I'll throw this at you and we'll kind of talk about it a little bit. They really don't know. It's hard to tell how many podcasts remain active. And because, you can start a podcast, but you could go a year or more in between your episodes. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. They can see how many podcasts are out there, and there seem to be somewhere north of 700,000 podcasts out there. But they can't really tell how many are truly active. And there's some statistics on 44% of podcasts have less than 3 episodes. 34% of the US population, basically over a third, listens to a podcast on a weekly basis, which I thought was interesting. And 55% of Americans between the ages of 12 and 55 at least are listening on a monthly basis. I know I'm a podcast listener, but I sit back and I look at these numbers, and you start to wonder what's behind it.
Yeah, well, I think, a lot of the numbers that you just sort of rattled off indicate to me at least that regardless of the chart we're looking at, an enormous number of human beings are listening to audio content or some form of podcast, perhaps video podcast as well. And so watching a declining chart like this, or possibly a declining chart, it's really hard to tell at this point. But, to sort of imply that the golden age of podcasting is, waning, I think is probably premature based on some of the numbers that you said. There's not a lot of things. What I like to think about is there's not a lot of choices that people make where 1/3 of Americans are making that choice unless it comes to sort of food and sleep. And so when it comes to entertainment, with all of the vast array of choices in the world today, 1/3 of Americans are at least dedicating some of their time to this particular endeavor. It seems to me that it's a large segment of the country.
I also wonder if there's more of a story here. We're not that far past, Christmas season and stuff like that. And the Christmas story, they're all huddled around the radio and they're listening to Little Orphan Annie, waiting for the Ovaltine commercial. And I just wonder if this is part of that same oral tradition that is really part of the part of the ethos of, mankind, so to speak, and certainly a part of American history, the history of radio and the popularity there. If podcasts are just that next evolution, and that 44% of those have only 3 episodes, it kind of makes you realize just how difficult it is to do and do consistently.
Yeah, I think I hear these numbers and I think that podcasting is a lot more like streaming in that, when people gathered around the radio, it was a communal experience. And the way podcasts work, I live with four people, two kids and a wife and me, and almost none of us listen to the same podcast, and yet we all listen to podcasts. And I think one of the beautiful things that happens in the world is when you stumble upon someone who happens to listen to the same thing you do. And I think it's sort of an instant friendship because it's so much like streaming, whereas we used to have three channels, and if you were watching CBS, you always kind of knew what was on NBC or ABC, even if you weren't watching it. So it was a common conversation. Nowadays, it just doesn't operate like that, and podcasting seems to be the same. I actually think there's a story in podcast about loneliness. The idea that the way that our media has fragmented and allows us to listen to things that no one else is listening to who we know, it does, I think, contribute to the sense that we are alone because we are not able to gather at the water cooler and say, hey, did you listen to the latest episode of X? Oftentimes the answer is, I don't know what you're talking about.
Right, and that's a really great point. It's also when you do get together with people, oftentimes a topic of conversation, what podcast I just listened to that conveyed this piece of information or whatever. And I think what's interesting too, I found some statistics and some numbers that say that the market for podcasting they're expecting it to grow to reach 255 million by the year 2027, which I think is interesting that they're still projecting growth in the total number of listeners, yet the total number of episodes may go down insofar as like there's a consistency and a group that will kind of maintain and build audience over maybe fewer episodes or so on. Maybe the market is changing and maturing, which you expect from all markets, yet you don't get to see like in very static graphs like this.
Yeah, similar again to streaming in that quite often now episodes of a television show, end up being 8 or 10 episodes rather than the standard 22 when we were kids. Nowadays podcasts tend to have seasons now. I know that when I was a very early podcast listener, and the notion of a season never existed. They just kept coming and they came relentlessly. My wife and I had a podcast on storytelling for a very long time, and it was once a week. And at one point, I remember my wife saying, maybe we should have seasons, which was her basically saying, I want to work for 12 weeks and then take 12 weeks off. And I think maybe though that's what less listeners are looking for.
Right.
The idea of I'm going to get a 12-week experience on a topic and then you can go away for a while and I don't need to hear from you for a little bit. And when you come back, I'll be happy. In the same way, like I said, television shows, I'm thrilled when my wife says, let's watch this
Right.
show. And I say, how many episodes? And she says 8. I think great. I'm really happy. So I think there's a great similarity between the way podcasts are being produced and television is being produced.
Yeah, no doubt that there's an evolution to that process. People are trying to figure that out. Similarly to the adventure that we're on, we're gonna have to figure out how these episodes either form seasons or just does it go over a period of a year or whatever. We'll take the audience on that journey with us. I do think that there is an amazing set of commonality around you get to the end of the season, you take that break, and then you're ready to hear it again. And I think that's interesting too, from the standpoint of how do you capture that and tell that story purely with the numbers and so on. And I think that's what's missing here. And I think the punchline is that I think there's a lot of podcasts that don't make it, right.
Right.
They don't continue on. And I think for us starting off here, I think we want to just be upfront and say, hey, we recognize the difficulty of this. Here's some numbers to back that up. And then, maybe we can be part of that oral tradition and sharing things and how to make them sticky here.
Yeah, my hope is that, maybe in 12, 15, 24 weeks, we have some new data to look at on
Right.
podcasting, answer some questions that we might have. I'm sort of fascinated by the idea that maybe people like shorter podcast seasons because they want to listen to more podcasts, but just physically don't have the time to do it. So if you give me an 8 episode season, that means I can clear you off the books for a while, invite one of my friends' recommendations onto my podcast player for a while. Because at this point, you can't really, for many of us who are podcast enthusiasts, you can't add another one because there's just no time to actually listen to them. But when someone says, well, it's just 6 episodes, I think, well, yeah, I'm in for that. I can manage to pull that off and then push it aside for a while. So I'd be interested to see if the numbers play that out for us at some point, if we can find numbers to back that up.
Yeah, I'll make a note of that, and we'll follow back up on this at a later date and see what those numbers reveal. So I think that's it for this episode. Appreciate you all tuning in. Thanks, Matthew, for playing along, and it's great to start this endeavor.
I can't wait to see the next numbers you have to show us, Tom.
All right, thanks. You've reached the end of the show. We ask that if you found this useful, that you please tell a friend. Leave us a 5-star review on the podcast platform of your choice. And if you're watching us via YouTube, please like and subscribe.